When I say the 7 wonders of the world, you might think of these 7 things. Petra, the Northern Lights, the Great Wall of China, etc. And you'd be right to think of these, as they are labeled as wonders of the world. But the original list of 7 wonders referred to something different. These 7 sites all around the Mediterranean. These were the original wonders of the world, now called the wonders of the ancient world. All of these monuments, save one, are now lost to time, destroyed one way or the other. In this video, I want to explore what happened to each of these wonders, what each one can tell us about the ancient world, and where the idea of these wonders came from in the first place. This video is brought to you by my Patreon. If you want to support the channel monetarily, please head over to my Patreon where you can get all of my videos a couple days early, ad-free. If you go up to the Earl/Countess or Duke/Duchess tiers, you'll also be credited at the end of all my videos. So please, if you have the desire and ability to support me, please consider heading over to patreon.com/generalistpapers, or click the link in the description or pinned comment. Thanks a bunch. Now back to the video. The 7 wonders of the world started as an idea in ancient Greece. It was mentioned by a number of writers like Herodotus, the so-called father of history, and Diodorus Siculus, another important Greek historian. Alexander the Great's conquest of most of the Middle East and North Africa in the 4th century BC gave Greek travelers access to new exotic lands like Egypt, Persia, and Babylon. The 7 wonders, or as they were originally called, Theomata, meaning sites, were compiled in these circumstances. There was no established list of wonders in the beginning, however. In the same way a list of must-see sites in Paris will differ from one travel blog to another, different writers compiled separate lists. That said, a few things remained constant. The number 7 was established quite early, so most lists didn't exceed that number. Also, there were certain wonders that were always included. It wasn't until the Renaissance, surprisingly, that the list we have today was firmly established, and by that point in time, all but one wonder was destroyed. So the list we have today is as follows: the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. So let's start our journey in chronological order, starting with by far the oldest wonder, and the only one still standing, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most famous structures in human history. It is by far the oldest wonder of them all, being built in the 2500s BC, during ancient Egypt's 4th dynasty. As you can see, it's shockingly older than all the others, beating second place by almost 2,000 years. The pyramids are so old that the likes of King Tut and Cleopatra would have thought of them as ancient. Next to being the oldest wonder, it's also the only one still standing. Really, this makes perfect sense. The pyramids are colossal, human-made mountains, the largest weighing about 6 million tons in all, and standing at an impressive 138 meters high, which is actually shorter than its original height, which was 147 meters. The Great Pyramid was actually the tallest man-made structure for 3,800 years, only losing the top spot in 1087 to the old St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Next to its size, it's also the most structurally stable shape you could make, a pyramid, so it's no wonder that it has survived so long. The pyramid was built by Pharaoh Khufu, also called Cheops in Greek, who ordered the building of the pyramid as his tomb. Here's a look at the inside of the structure. Pharaoh Khufu was entombed here, in the king's chamber. The second pyramid was built by and for Khufu's son, Khafra, who is also believed to have built the Sphinx. And the smallest pyramid was built by Khufu's grandson, Menkaura. The outside of the pyramids were encased in limestone, so the surface used to be smooth. At the top of the pyramid was a capstone that was plated in either gold or electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. Years of natural and human-made erosion has mostly removed the limestone casing, and the precious capstone was taken probably hundreds if not thousands of years ago. The mystery of how the pyramids were built has puzzled people for literally thousands of years, resulting in a myriad of conspiracy theories that range from magic to, of course, aliens. We still don't know precisely how the pyramids were built, but we know they were built by the Egyptians. There are a plethora of workable theories as to how the Egyptians cut and moved the stones, the most widely accepted theory being that they used a series of ramps. We do know that they weren't built by slaves, as many still believe. All data points to a large, skilled workforce that was paid for their time. The pyramids have captivated us for millennia, and will continue to do so. But we must move along. Come, we need to make an early start for our next destination, across the desert, more than 1,000 kilometers away, in Babylon. The second oldest wonder are the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. These are difficult to discuss because out of all of the 7 wonders, they may not have existed at all. The gardens were supposedly a towering structure of step-like tiers. They were self-watering, meaning there was a complex irrigation system that moved water from the Euphrates River to the plants. They were built, according to ancient sources, by Nebuchadnezzar II as a gift for his wife, Amytis, who missed the lush hills of her homeland, Media. The gardens were supposed to mimic these hills. So why are historians so uncertain about their existence? Well, the only sources of their existence are from Greek writers, all of whom never saw the gardens themselves. The earliest source is Josephus, who claims to have heard about the gardens from a Babylonian priest named Berossus, who also told him the story of King Nebuchadnezzar II and his wife. All the other sources are likewise second-hand accounts, though they all claim to be quoting from people who saw the gardens. Also, there are no native Babylonian accounts of the gardens, which is a pretty major problem. And to top it all off, there is no archaeological evidence for them either, though some believe they are hidden under the Euphrates River. So if they didn't exist, where did the story of these gardens come from? The earliest lists of these 7 wonders didn't just include the gardens of Babylon, but also its walls. The walls of Babylon were the most impressive walls in the ancient world. According to Herodotus, they were 24 meters thick and 97 meters tall, though he was almost certainly exaggerating. It's not clear why later writers discarded these walls from their lists of wonders, but it makes sense that they would have wanted to keep something from the city of Babylon on their lists. Other Mesopotamian cities were known for their gardens, most famously the city of Nineveh. These gardens are well documented, and we have archaeological evidence of them. I think it's very likely that the Greeks who saw these gardens may have misspoke about where they were, or the people who heard about them misremembered and said they were in Babylon. If the gardens existed, they were built around 600 BC. Obviously, we don't know when or how they were destroyed, but it would have been around the 1st century AD. If the gardens were actually the ones in Nineveh, well, I'll be honest, I couldn't find when those were destroyed either. Control over the city of Nineveh changed hands many times, from the Mesopotamians to the Greeks to the Persians and the Muslims. It seems likely that they didn't exist by the 1st century, though. Okay, back on the camel, we have another long trek, this time to Asia Minor, to Ephesus. Ephesus was a Greek city whose ruins now lie in the country of Turkey. The people of Ephesus were particularly religious. They were devoted to Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt. She was the patron deity of the city, similar to how Athena was the patron deity of Athens. The Ephesians version of Artemis was somewhat different to the rest of the Greek worlds. The Ephesian Artemis was a sort of mother goddess, representing life and fertility. This was actually very common in the pagan world, where gods and goddesses had very disparate connotations in different places. The Temple of Artemis was actually 3 separate temples, all built after the previous was destroyed. The first temple was built sometime before the Ionian migration, the period when the first Greeks migrated to southern Anatolia, around 1000 BC. So the first temple probably wasn't built for Artemis at all. In the 7th century BC, it was destroyed by a flood. A much grander temple, this one actually dedicated to Artemis, was built in its stead. Unfortunately, it was also ultimately destroyed, not by a flood or any other natural phenomena, but by arson. In 365 BC, a man set fire to the temple and burned it to the ground. Why did he do this? Was it a religious act against the goddess, or perhaps it was a form of political protest? No to both of these hypotheses. He did it, and this is from his own lips, apparently, to be remembered. Essentially, he did it to be famous. For his crime, he was executed, and the Ephesians forbade anyone from speaking his name, as to not give him what he desired. Unfortunately, the historian Theopompus and later Strabo couldn't help themselves and mentioned his name in their writings. If you want to know his name, you can Google it, but I think I'll abide by the Ephesians' wishes and not mention it in this video. The third version of the temple, the one listed as a wonder of the world, was built after the second one's destruction, and it was one of the grandest Greek temples in history, measuring in at a length of 137 meters and a height of 18 meters. Writers like Antipater of Sidon, whose list of 7 wonders of the world is one of the most famous, wrote that the temple was the grandest wonder of them all. The sheer amount of columns surrounding the temple is an image that still endures in the popular imagination. The temple was severely damaged by a Gothic raid in the 3rd century AD, and it was finally destroyed beyond repair by a Christian mob in the late 4th century. Traditionally, St. John Chrysostom was said to have led the mob, but there's no actual evidence of this. The temple's location was then lost for centuries, until it was rediscovered by the British in 1869 by an expedition led by John Turtle Wood. The ruins are now all that's left of this once great temple. Our boat's all packed and ready. We have a long voyage to the Greek homeland. Hopefully we get there quicker than poor Odysseus. Olympia was the ancient site for the Greek Olympics. For most of the year, it was a small town with an important temple complex. Travelers from around the Greek world would make pilgrimages to the temple for religious observance. And every 4 years, the temple complex would fill with thousands of people for the ancient Olympic Games. The main temple at Olympia was to the king of the gods, Zeus. Inside the temple was a huge statue of the god, measuring over 12 meters high, and this statue is our next wonder. It was built in the 5th century BC by the renowned sculptor and architect Phidias, who also built the statue of Athena in the Acropolis in Athens. The statue was made of plates of ivory and gold on a wooden frame. The throne was also made of wood, plated with ebony, ivory, gold, and precious stones. The statue was one of the largest in ancient Greece, so large that some writers, like Strabo, critiqued the statue for being too big for his temple. If he stood up, his head would hit the ceiling. The fate of the statue is actually a bit of a mystery. We know it was still there in the late 4th century, during the rule of Emperor Theodosius I, but we don't know if it still stood by the time the temple itself burned down 100 years later. Some legends state that the statue was disassembled and taken eastward. There's no evidence of this, but since we have to head back to Asia Minor for our next wonder anyway, let's follow the legend. We land in Halicarnassus, a major Greek city on the west coast of modern-day Turkey. Halicarnassus was one of the only monarchies at a time when most Greek city-states embraced forms of democracy. It was the birthplace of Herodotus, who we already mentioned at the beginning of the video. Anyway, the mausoleum was built as the tomb for the Carian king Mausolus and his family. Yep, the word mausoleum comes from the king's name. So this isn't just a mausoleum, it's the mausoleum. The structure was built by Mausolus' wife and sister, Artemisia II, in 351 BC. Don't worry, most historians think that this incestuous marriage was strictly ceremonial, and the two siblings' spouses didn't have a sexual or romantic relationship. Still, they were clearly close, as apparently Artemisia mourned her brother's death very intensely. Legend says that she even drank some of his ashes with her wine at meals, an image that became a popular subject in Western art. The mausoleum was 45 meters tall and contained over 400 sculptures from some of the finest artisans from around the Greek-speaking world. A few of these statues still remain and are housed in, where else, the British Museum. Similar to our last wonder, we're unfortunately in the dark about what happened to the mausoleum. We know it was still standing in the Roman period, but by 1402 it was in ruins, when Christian crusaders took what was left of it to build the nearby Bodrum Castle. We're now sailing away from Anatolia and on to the island of Rhodes. The island's entry into the roster is the mighty Colossus of Rhodes, a 33-meter-tall bronze statue of the sun god Helios. The Rhodians built the statue as thanks to the sun god, whom they credited with their survival and victory after a siege by the Macedonian leader Demetrius Poliorcetes. It was built in the 280s BC, and it drew eyes from all around the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, its grandness did not translate to a long life. It only stood for 56 years, until a massive earthquake hit the Isle of Rhodes in around 226 BC, snapping the statue at the knees. It was not rebuilt, as the Rhodians took the earthquake as a sign from the gods, and so left the remains of the statue on the earth where it lay. Even after it toppled, there are accounts of people still making pilgrimage to see the fallen Colossus. The pieces of the statue were left for centuries apparently, until later invaders slowly took the bronze as scrap metal, leaving nothing much of it left. Still, the Colossus of Rhodes inspired artists for centuries after. For example, America's own Statue of Liberty, a gift from the French to celebrate the centennial of the US's independence, was inspired by the Colossus. And so we set sail again, back to where we started, to Egypt. The next and last wonder on our list will serve us well on our maritime journey. Unlike most of the other wonders that served religious or monumental purposes, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was very useful to the coastal city named for Alexander the Great, that quickly became one of the most prominent ports in the Mediterranean, and one of the most famous cities, containing Alexander's tomb, as well as the famed Library of Alexandria. Situated on the island of Pharos, which is also the ancient name for the lighthouse itself, it was built in 280 BC and was measured 100 meters high. As you may have figured out, the lighthouse and the Colossus of Rhodes only existed at the same time for about 54 years, meaning those 5 decades and change were the only time someone could have traveled to see all 7 wonders together. Anyway, the lighthouse was the first of its kind. There had been lighthouse-like structures before it in the Mediterranean, but they were nothing more than small stone columns with a fire beacon on top. The light on the Pharos was provided by a furnace, and a large metal mirror that deflected the light of the fire out to the ships to sea. It was destroyed over time by 3 successive earthquakes, one in 956 AD, one in 1303, and the last in 1323. After the first 2 earthquakes, the city did repairs, but the final earthquake completely toppled the structure. The stones were later used by the Mamluks in 1480 to build the citadel of Qaitbay on the site. And with that, our journey is over, with only one wonder, the Great Pyramid, left standing. While most of the ancient wonders are indeed lost to time, their historical significance and impact is still with us. Thanks for watching. If you could go back in time and visit one of these wonders during its glory days, which would you choose? Please like and subscribe, and if you want to support me and what I do, please head over to my Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks. Bye.